water? Okay, yeah, there you go. It's all
I
yours.
don't live without my water.
Yeah. You can either hold or you can leave it in the cradle, but you have to almost kiss it. So, give me help. It's my area of expertise. How about that?
Okay, is that good?
Hold on.
I don't
Hold
know.
on. Say thank you.
Okay, is it on now? Yeah, it's on now.
Yes, so Kathie Sundstrom.
Right,
Yeah. So Kathie, so you flew in all the way from California.
I did. Got here last night.
God bless you. It's a delight. Kathie, tell us what you're going to be talking about and what verses you're going to be highlighting in Psalms.
I'm going to share with you some of the ways through my life, which we have all been through ups and downs, but how I've needed to trust the Lord. You don't make it through life without trusting the Lord. At least I couldn't. And some of the verses I really liked when Angela shared with me your verse that you're using from Psalms, and I looked it up, and I've been thinking about a rock, and I keep a rock on my desk, so whenever I look at that rock, I know God is my rock. So some things I've thought about a rock, not only is he God our firm foundation, he's immovable, he's stable, he's dependable, he's our refuge, and he outlasts time. That rock's never going to disappear, just like God. He outlasts time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep going.
Oh, so one of my favorite verse for most of my life that I can remember is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which you probably know. And I like to personalize it. Trust in the Lord with all my heart. Lean not on my own understanding. In all my ways acknowledge him, and he will direct my paths. So that's what I've needed to do. Personalize any verse you like, personalize it and put you in it.
Yeah. And what did you love about the Psalm 18? Tell us. The Psalm 18, 1 and 2 that you were talking about earlier. What did you love about that and how it connects with trusting God? Was it the rock? Was there any other examples you had?
Well, that the rock is, well, what was that other verse I had? Is it that one? I don't remember.
No. Okay, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. So, so tell us, how did you grow up? How did you meet Christ?
Well, I grew up in a Christian family. I grew up in Denver, raised in Denver public schools. We were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night. When we moved closer to the church, Wednesday night, youth group, all that. By the time I was 5, we had child evangelism come to the house and did their backyard club. And at 5 years old, I knew right from wrong. I knew what forgiveness is. And that's why I got involved in children's ministries. I accepted the Lord when I was 5. My mother prayed with me, and I accepted the Lord in my life. So that's the first time I really trusted the Lord with my life.
That's amazing. So lead us from there to what we were talking about the other day, which was when did you meet your first husband? And
It was in 1968. I was out of high school, went to a college class party. We belonged to a large church, Calvary Temple here in Denver, which is no longer Calvary Temple, but went to a college class party on a Saturday night. It was a progressive dinner. I was dressed up, had a wig on and all this stuff. Met this guy, and we drove around town, and afterwards, there were 4 of us in the car, but afterwards he said, "Do you want to ride home?" And I said, "Yeah." So he took me home, asked for my phone number, and by Monday night he called, asked me for a date the next weekend, which happened to be his birthday, October 5th. So that was Yeah, but that's tomorrow, isn't it? Would have been our first date. So we started dating. One of the first things I knew about him was he loved Southern gospel music. He was a singer. He loved men's quartets. He had a beautiful voice. He sang. So that was October. By April, Easter, we were engaged. By August, we were married. Went pretty quick.
That's amazing. And how many years were you married?
We were married 46 years.
That's amazing. That's a gift.
Well, my parents were married 74 and a half.
Wow. And I know there was something that you were telling me that you both loved to do.
Well, we both loved, he got me into Southern gospel music, but we also loved ping pong. So after we've been married for a while, we built a house here in South Glen from the ground up, picked a lot, built a house. First two purchases were a dining room table, because I like to entertain, and a ping pong table, which was in our basement, unfinished basement, but he taught me to play ping pong.
That's amazing. And take us to when you started recognizing, I think you said it was around 1969, that everything had been going well and smoothly in life, and then around 1969,
Yeah.
some things happened.
I'd written 69 down, but that's when we got married.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
then we had two children.
Yes.
They grew up in 1996.
Okay.
One August day, life changed for us. He called me. He worked at Lockheed Martin, which was Martin Marietta. He called me and said, would you come get me? Something's going on. His fingers were numb, went up to his hand, went through his body. It was numb, just tingling and not right. So I went and picked him up. He didn't drive. He ended up being legally blind, so he didn't drive much anyway. Picked him up, came home, called his doctor. He said, get him to the ER, which we did. By then, he felt fine. All the tests came back negative. There was nothing that they could say was wrong with him. So we went on. We went to on a cruise to Alaska the next month, which we had already planned and paid for. Did that. But as the next months and months went on, he kept having these episodes. We called them episodes because we didn't have a name for them. Went to neurologists, went all kinds of, back to ER. They started, did you ever watch the program with Tim Allen? And the nurses in the ER knew him by name. It got to be like that, which wasn't a good thing. Yeah. What are you here for this time? But they finally, a neurologist said, these are complex migraines, which we never heard of. Only one time did he ever have pain. He had a headache. So they gave him Dilaudid on an empty stomach. He threw up so violently, I'd never seen anyone like that, which burned his vocal cords. Not only could he not talk, he couldn't sing then for weeks, which he was a singer. Couldn't do that.
So what you're saying is life had gone on just like you had planned and kind of expected and anticipated, and it was lovely, and you had your two children, and then all of this started happening, and I'm sure it felt very out of control.
It did. And some of that time, just the growing up in a Christian home and knowing the Lord, sometimes you just trust the Lord automatically. And other times you have to go, oh, Lord, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So during this time, when you were trying to figure out what was happening with him, and then once he was diagnosed, was there any particular person that supported you, or any particular anything really that helped you lean into trusting God more? Or would you say you just kept leaning in hard?
Well, probably my Tuesday morning Bible study at the church I was going to. Those ladies, we just bonded. They were there for me. I was there for them when we needed it. It's important to be in a small group where you know each other.
So community.
Community.
Community's big.
Mm-hmm.
And so go ahead and tell us, go ahead and finish the story with your husband.
Well,
And his name is
Dennis. His name was Dennis Buck. So when I came here before, I was Kathie Buck. So in 2006, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, but the doctor said he will die with it, not because of it. And he did a seed implant and stuff. He was also diagnosed that year with thyroid cancer. And they took half of it out and then the other half, and then went back and got nodules before they got the whole thing. Yeah. So also that year, we had a trip. We did a cruise to Hawaii with his sister and her husband. So that was a fun thing. Life, it just has ups and downs. All of your life, it will have ups and downs. So then by 2008, my kids moved within 6 weeks of each other. My daughter and her husband went to Florida. My son and his wife and my 4 grandchildren, they had the nerve to move to Indiana. So they're gone. So then a year and a half or so later, in 2010, it was May, and the pastor of the church I went to said, let's do a cruise. And Dennis goes, yeah. We went to the Mexican Riviera, and by that time, sometimes he was walking with a cane, because I have a picture of him. We got off the ship one time, and I have a picture of him standing beside the ship with a cane. And then he got to where he wasn't moving around. I thought he was just kind of seasick, even though that was the 3rd cruise. But he couldn't even get up out of the bed and walk to the bathroom on his own. He was just kind of dizzy. And I remember saying, we paid for this cruise. One of us is going to enjoy it. So I got out and walked around the ship, and there were 14 of us on that cruise from the church, 5 couples and 4 children. And some were very good friends of ours. Our pastor and his wife were there. Well, things just got worse. So I ended up talking to the ship's doctor. And I made a list of all of his medications, which is like a mile long, all of his medical history, which was like 2 miles long. Went to the ship's doctor, and she said, well, bring him down. I said, he can't walk. So we brought a wheelchair to the room, got him to the doctor's office, and she said, look at this. He was looking right at her with one eye. The other eye was going that way. She said, this is an ocular stroke. And we're out in the middle of the ocean. Before we got to Cabo San Lucas, she said, as soon as we get off the ship, you need to get him to the hospital. So I called his doctor here in Littleton, and he said, get him to the States and get him to the hospital. So one of our friends knew computers, which I didn't know, got us, made tickets. We went through Phoenix because there was no nonstop from Cabo San Lucas to Denver. We went through Phoenix because my sister lived there. If we had to stay, at least I had family. We got to Denver, got him to the hospital. And so he was there until they moved him to rehab. He'd been in rehab 2 or 3 other times after he'd had a couple other minor strokes. So with physical therapy, occupational therapy, and by that time he was showing some dementia. So with speech therapy, and then they'd start coming to the house too. So we were doing all those things, and that was May of 2010. And boy, did you have to trust the Lord through that. But the next year, December of 2011, he started complaining of his knee. He'd yell in pain, just scream. He couldn't get comfortable. He couldn't even walk to the car. The neighbor boy, the neighbor man, he was younger than we were, came over and lifted Dennis, carried him to the car. I got him to Littleton Hospital, and we'd been back and forth. I knew my way well back there. It was a back problem. When they did the issues, it was the discs on his back. And the doctor said, he's got to do back surgery, but he may never walk again. I said, but he can't live like he is. So I signed the paper for him to do the back surgery. And in the meantime, he had to wait several days to get off of some of his medications that were, blood thinners. So he went to a nursing home rehab center again for a while, went back, and I knew before that I can't care for him anymore. And so after his surgery, we went to what was the Johnson Center, which is now Summer and Glen. And I had been volunteering there anyway once a week, so I kind of had a clue. It was under Christian Living Communities. So he settled in there. He ended up being there for over 4 years before he passed away. In the meantime, my parents had moved down just a mile from us, but they were older. They ended up like 15, 20 feet from his room. So I had 3 people. That must have been when I met Ruth and was here because, I couldn't spend 24/7. I had to do other things and get out of there on occasion. But while he was there, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And definitely on his face sheet is Alzheimer's, but it was really vascular dementia. And he also had epilepsy. I got there. He started having these seizures, and it's like, pick your feet up. And he couldn't, So that's where he was.
So all of that turmoil and trouble by yourself. I mean,
Pretty much my kids had moved.
Without family,
It was
family. You were taking care of everybody.
It was church family.
It's church family. Yeah. So community important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by December, right between Christmas and New Year's of 2015, my dad died. And then right before Easter, 3 months later, Dennis died in March. 3 weeks after my mother-in-law passed away. And the next year, right before Mother's Day, was my mother's turn to go. So I went to Grief Share, and that was a lifesaver. I did that, and then when I started coming to South, Dan Elliott came to my house to get to know me, and he said, would you start a Grief Share at South? And Grace and Jeff Hunter were some of the first people that came, and now they are leading it. So when you lose somebody, I really recommend Grief Share. Get involved in that. So he was gone. A good friend of mine, Cheryl, that had been on that Mexico cruise with us. And that was an experience to get him off the ship and to the airport and all that was, But we decided we're going to travel. So first we did a Southern Gospel cruise, a Bill Gaither cruise to Alaska.
So this is with your friend Cheryl.
With my friend Cheryl.
What a great friend.
Oh, yeah. They've been she and her husband been travel agents, and she had never been to Alaska or Hawaii. So the next year we decided to go to Hawaii, and we did a Southern Gospel cruise. So the first morning, after we got on the next morning, here's a ping pong tournament. So I didn't have my paddle with me, but I went to this ping pong tournament, stood there. Everybody's coming in as couples or with a partner. One man came in, and he looked around, and he said, would you like to play? I said, sure. So we played a little ping pong, and as time went on, I lost my first match. He won his, but I hung around. I wanted to play some more. So after the tournament was over, he came, introduced himself, and he said his daughter's on the ship with him, so he couldn't stay long, but I got his name. He showed me a picture of his daughter, found out he lives in Southern California, never saw him again all week long. And I looked. So I got home and I looked him up on Facebook. I had never done Facebook before. I didn't want anything to do with Facebook. But I did it. I found him. I looked to see, I read what he said, what he posted, what his friends said to him and about him. Well, then he put his email on Facebook, which no one does, because he was trying to sell an electric bike. He loves electric bikes. So I got his email. So I sent him an email, and it took a few days. It's like, Lord, I guess this isn't, yeah. But finally he responded, and we just started an email relationship. What's your favorite this and that and the other thing. And finally he said, is it okay if I call you? It's like, sure. So he started calling once a week, and it got a little more often. And that was June of 2018, 2 years after Dennis had died. He had had a wife that had a disease that it had been a year since she died. So we started to get to know each other on the phone. And then he said, there's another cruise coming up to the Caribbean, Southern Gospel Cruise, in February. So I met him there. We got to know each other on the cruise. We spent every morning up in what's called the Crow's Nest, which is the top of the ship, having devotions together. And our relationship just grew. And so we did another cruise to Mexico on that one. And we just got to know each other. And he came to Colorado a couple days. I went to California. We planned a date. Well, I got engaged Christmas Eve, right in front of his family. A lot of them I never knew. It was very sweet the way he did it. And we had set our date for May 28th that we were going to get married. It was going to be a small wedding in my living room here in Colorado.
And what year were you planning to get married? May 28th of what year?
2020.
2020.
But then his daughter Melinda got sick. She fell, broke her leg. She had a lot of stomach issues. She had cataracts in both eyes. So I was out there a couple times helping with that. We ended up having to postpone that wedding to September 29th. So it's been 3 years now. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary. So we came, but it was during COVID. So my kids and grandkids would not come. But he and his daughter came. I had my sister come, a cousin came. There were 13 of us in my small living room. And we flew back to California that afternoon, got Melinda situated at home. She has special needs. We got her home with a caregiver. We drove back to Ontario, California, spent one night planning to get on the plane the next morning, fly back to Denver, rent a van, pack all the stuff. I'd had boxes of stuff packed and move back, do our honeymoon driving back to California. Instead, the next morning, we were on our way down to breakfast, and I didn't remember this, but I said, I need to sit down. He turned around, and I was on the ground. I'd hit my head. Blood was running out of my left ear. He was down on the ground performing CPR to his bride of less than 24 hours, not knowing if he was going to still have a wife. So they took me to the trauma center. And at that time, I had no clue what was going on for a week. I was in trauma center, ICU. Then they moved me to rehab for 3 weeks. I came home the end of October with a wheelchair, walker, home health, somebody come help shower me, all that. So did I ever have to trust the Lord through all that? And today I do almost anything I want. I've learned some exercises. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with vertigo, so that could have been what I had. But it's like, this is the way life is, up and down. So shall I share those other verses I've come up with?
Yes, please.
One of them is in Hebrews 10:38, and my version says, the person who is right with me will live by trusting in me. So if you're right with the Lord, you need to trust him. I don't think there's a choice. We have to do that.
Well, it sounds like you have to make a choice in the midst of your circumstances.
You do.
And it's not always a
Easy.
great feeling or easy.
No, it's
right?
not always easy. But Romans 15:13 says, the God who gives hope will fill you with much joy and peace as you trust in him. So that's an advantage to trusting in him, because we have joy and peace. And how can I trust in him? Because of the song, he's been faithful all my life. He's always been there.
So just his constant faithfulness. It's
Yeah.
not that your life has been easy.
No.
It was the first half, it sounds like it was predictable the first
Yeah.
half, but it's not because everything was as planned. And a lot
Not
of
at
it
all.
was felt out of control. But because he had been faithful in the past,
I
you
knew.
could lean in.
Yeah.
And
And
Go
this
ahead.
is, it says, trust in the Lord with all our hearts. I made this and gave that to Niles, as my husband now. One of my first gifts I gave him. I remembered the other day, one of the first things I sent him for his birthday, I had no clue. We were barely dating, and what do you send him? So I baked some cookies, had little tiny cookie cutters that are shaped like letters, happy birthday, Niles, and also sugar cookies shaped like ping pong paddle with a ball. But back in 2020, in February, June had a workshop, about making a road map of your life. So I did that back then. And the blue line, the turquoise line here is trusting. You had to trust. This is only up to our engagement or planning a wedding, but the ups and downs of life.
So, and I know, can you speak to the fact that, do you feel like that meeting Niles and having that ping pong relationship and also having that in common with your first husband
Mhm.
would you call it a sort of redemption?
I
What do
suppose
you
so. I think,
How would you describe it?
I think the Lord put that, Dennis loved those two things, Niles loves those two things, and so do I. It just kind of,
Right.
we just meshed together.
That's so beautiful. And sometimes we get to, on this side of life, see conclusions or see new dreams fulfilled, right? Sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
But God is still faithful, which
He
is
is.
what I hear you saying.
He is.
And so what would be your final words to our sisterhood ladies today? As far as just encouraging them if they're in a really difficult time and it's gone on and on and on and it doesn't seem to let up, what would you say?
Remember how he's been faithful in the past.
Yes.
He will be faithful again tomorrow, next year, 10 years from now. He will always be faithful. We just need to trust in that.
Because you couldn't always see what the answer
No,
was going to be,
no.
right? So I think you told me that sometimes the circumstances just work themselves out. And that
Sometimes.
can be God too,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Kathie. It's an honor to have you. And thank you for sharing your story. Would you please just clap for Kathie? And while we're transitioning to our tables, Laura's going to play the song that Kathie mentioned. I believe it's Good God or Good Father. I can't remember which, but she's going to play the right one. I promise. And yeah, go ahead. And so we're going to go ahead and transition to our tables and just have our discussion time there. Just find your leader wherever